This is The Grief of Politics, episode 13, and I am Joseph Carlson, and I'm here with Avin Carroll. Avin, how are you doing?
Doing good. Good morning, everybody.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody listening to the show. Just to let everybody know, this is our 1 year anniversary of the podcast. We've been doing this January 20th, 2021. We did it. Now it's January 20th, 2022.
That's a year.
When this posts, anyway. Yeah, so it's a year. So I do have some cool stats, Avin,
Oh.
before we get on to the main show. Before we get on to like the announcements, stuff like that. Well, this is kind of an announcement. I went through the plays of how many, plays we had over the year through SoundCloud, because that's what we use, and we send it to Apple iTunes to do, or the podcast app.
Mm-hmm.
We had, I guess they just started from February, because I imagine in January we had no listens, maybe one or two, I think. We had 9 plays in February, 8 of them were about the police unions. One was about the Capitol insurrection. March, we had 3 plays. April, we had 4. Basically, our biggest month, we kind of grew and grew and grew a little bit. We had a dip in October, but we had 32 plays in August. And that was like a smorgasbord of things. In September, we had 33 plays. November, we had 41. Our biggest was December of last year. We had 62 plays. People that actually listen to us. And I think this is just through SoundCloud, because I don't know. It seems like the Apple thing is still in beta, like their whole internal stuff. So you can look at reviews and likes and stars, but you cannot see like listening data. Google Play Store actually does a much better job, I think, than that of that. But I thought that was pretty cool. Just to let you know, like our biggest area was Richardson, in America, which I think is in Texas, I believe. I looked it up at one time. And then we had a lot in Germany, in Frankfurt.
Interesting.
Which is, yeah, it's really interesting. That was kind of cool. Thanks everybody for listening and stuff like that. So Avin and I, just to let everybody know, this podcast hits once a month. It's called The Grief of Politics. Please subscribe, stuff like that on Apple iTunes. Let people know about it. Share it with your friends. Say, hey, these are 2 somewhat decent people that talk about politics, and they don't yell at each other. We don't cut each other off. Avin is a little bit more conservative. I'm a little bit more liberal. And what happens is we switch on and off topics, and we talk about them every month. So like 1 month, I will pick a topic and then bring 3 articles forward to debate it, to kind of back up our case. And then the next month, Avin will pick a topic and do the same thing. And we're going to do some slight changes to that in the new year. One of them is I actually wrote a thesis sentence, which we talked about right before we started recording. It is terrible. I've not written a thesis since college. I probably would have got an F on this thesis if I had to do it again. But basically, we do want to make the podcast more about how these policies affect people, the grief that people come with. And we've said many times, grief is not just death. Grief is immigration. It is it is migration, it is taxes, it is income, all that kind of stuff has to obviously do with politics, and it affects people's lives. So what we're going to do when we do the articles from now, I talked to Avin about this offline, to tell everyone publicly, the first article that we submit and read will be setting up the topic and what we want to talk about. The next 2 articles will be reinforcing how the thing that we're talking about affects people's lives. And so that way it brings it back to grief and you can actually read it. And I found some pretty interesting articles. This time we're going to redo and talk about the Capitol attack again, because it has been a year. That's where our podcast started, but it has been a year, and there's been many revelations that have come out about the Capitol attack, who was involved, who knew what, who has been prosecuted, stuff like that. Before I get to my thesis, is there anything you want to add, Avin, to, I guess, the announcement section of the podcast? Is there anything that I forgot, I didn't mention, something like that?
A couple kind of thoughts on that. This is the first time I'm hearing those statistics. You and I have talked about it a little bit, but not kind of so broad sweeping in the total numbers. So, first off, I'd like to say, for anyone that's been listening to the podcast, we really appreciate it. Thank you. And we would love to hear from you. If you have any comments, questions, ideas, suggestions, things you'd like to hear us discuss, please feel free to reach out. At the end of every episode, Joe gives out the email address on how to reach us, but
it's gwgpodfellows@gmail.com, and just let us know you're talking about the Grief of Politics and what episode, because I use that for my other podcast. So I just want to know, what you're talking about, like what suggestion you have, that it isn't spam or whatever, and you're like, hey, this is specifically about the Redux Capitol attack. This is what I think, or this is what you guys didn't talk about, or something. Like, just be kind of specific in the subject line or whatever, so we know. So
yeah, and that was really kind of all I wanted to say. We'd love to hear from you guys, and again, thank you for supporting us by listening to us.
Yeah, I mean, what happens with me when I look at those stats is I only look at it like week to week. So I don't know. I mean, I just don't bring it out, but I figured since it's a year, we can look back, and it was amazing to see the graph kind of grow a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's not, we're not pulling millions of subscribers and stuff, but it's nice to see it grow a little bit here and there, and to see the graph go up as opposed to like flatline. I think
For sure.
we only had a few listens last month, but anyway, so yeah. My thesis again, like I said earlier, this is terrible. I haven't done this since high school. Avin said when he read it, he rolled his eyes, which is totally fair. I was not upset when he goes, I rolled my eyes. I go, yeah, kind of makes sense. Kind of makes sense that you would. Again, I'll just read this whole text that I sent to Avin, because this is my thesis. I wrote it in a text, but then I wrote a note underneath. This is the episode 13 text. This is about the January 6th attack. Although the threat to democracy remains real for the next few years, the toll on the institutions will take years to heal. As staffers on the Hill continue to burn out and seem to have little help with their mental health, normal Americans are faced with a difficult task of what to do, and also what to look out for based on the noise coming from both sides. And that is my thesis sentence. It's fairly like a long run-on sentence. And I put in parentheses, just FYI, and this is a text to Avin, just FYI, before I wrote this, I had to look up a thesis sentence. It has been a while. Avin, now, since this is an audio podcast, you can't roll your eyes in an audio form. What is your verbal eye rolling that you read this or like,
well, I mean, just for me personally, the first sentence of well, it is one sentence. The first few words about
right.
Though the threat to democracy is still real, just really feels overly dramatic. I'm not going to necessarily say that there isn't a threat to democracy, but I'm also like, oh man, like you make it sound like the insurrection is still happening and like we're still fighting.
Well, I told you offline, there was some articles to support that, but it didn't really fit into the thesis of this. I mean, maybe we'll talk about that later, because I think we should talk maybe about some reforms, and maybe we do talk about voter rights, because I've heard a lot of noise about from both sides. Hey, we're not doing this. Hey, we're trying to do this. Hey, they're trying to do this. They're not saying this. Like, from both sides.
And over the last year, there's been quite a bit of changes in voting rules, laws, and rights around the United States.
And what I'm doing right now, Evan, is you and I have both been not terrible, but we come up with an idea and then we don't write it down. So I'm actually making a note document right now, so we can actually talk about, so we remember this. So I'm writing it as we speak, so we don't forget. So I'm just doing bulleted points. So voter rights.
Got it.
Okay, that's one. Anyway, if we have more, I will, because like I said, we do this on the phone all the time where we have these big sweeping discussions. Like, it'd be cool to talk about these 4 things and we don't write them down.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I'll just have my phone with me when we talk and I'll just take these notes.
For the first time in a long time, I actually know what I want to do for my next.
Well, wow.
Which we'll announce at the end. So stay tuned so that you can hear what the next episode will be about, to figure out if you want to tune in.
Like, we usually go article by article. I think the only thing I'm going to change a little bit about the first article is I'm not going to read all of the first article. It was posted by Ken Glazer of the Washington Post on January 6, 2022 at 3 a.m. Eastern time, so good looking out. Basically, it is a breakdown of what has happened since January 6th of last year. And it basically marks the milestones, that there was an attack. And this is a direct quote. Actually, I'll read a little bit of this. There's a quote by Christopher Wray, who was appointed by Trump. He was the FBI director. He says the attack, quote, the attack, that siege was criminal behavior, plain and simple. And it's a behavior that we, the FBI, view as domestic terrorism. So whatever you think of Christopher Wray, now all of this stuff is in the purview of the FBI, basically. I think Biden announced the other day that he's starting some kind of task force on domestic terrorism or something. So I guess that's maybe another. I'm actually going to write that down. I did want to talk about that, but I haven't. I found some articles, but I didn't save them again. So there you go. I just made another note. So what do you think has changed in the year? I'll just start with a question then. What do you think has changed in the year since the attack on the Capitol? What, from your like conservative view, what do you think is like the biggest change so far?
I think the most stark change or important change on kind of a conservative viewpoint is the largest conservative party in our country is the Republican Party. And I think the majority, not entirely, but the majority of the Republican Party has done work to distance themselves from Trump and this kind of behavior. The more time we have, I think more Republican leaders have been more comfortable and more confident speaking out against what happened on January 6th, 2021. We live in Washington State. Our Secretary of State was Republican and actually has taken a role for election management or security with the Biden administration as a Republican now. But, she publicly came out almost immediately over and over again saying our election is secure. There's nothing wrong with mail-in ballots because Washington State is an all mail-in ballot state. We've been doing it for years.
I actually didn't know that.
What was that?
I didn't know that. Like I went into polling places or, the voting places a while ago to cast a real ballot or whatever. But lately I've been doing it by mail. I didn't know we were all mail-in.
Yeah. So if you go into a polling place, they give you a mail-in ballot form that you fill out the same way.
Yeah. Okay. Now that you said that, it's been a long time since I went into a place, so I forgot. But yeah, I mean, now thinking back, it's like, yeah, they do look exactly the same. You just put them in a box or whatever, you put them in a place, not mail them away.
Yep. So for us, at least for me personally, it was like, why is everyone all up in arms about mail-in ballots? Like, we've been doing this for years. The military's been doing it for decades.
Oh, yeah.
Like, why is this suddenly so suspect? Washington State is a blue state, so you could say that Democrats are controlling it, and so it's, always been skewed here. But the reality of it is we've had a Republican Secretary of State who manages the election results and election security for the last 10 years or 8 years. I mean, Kim Wyman was there forever and widely respected. Weird. And
yeah. I mean, I like Tim Wyman,
Not Kim Wyman?
Oh, sorry. I thought you said Tim.
Not Tim Eyman. For those who don't live in Washington State, Tim Eyman is a very well-known...
he's like anti-government. He really passed a lot of laws for... I don't know now. I know back when I was in high school and early college, he was really like, hey, this is a tax that is on, it's a ridiculous tax. We need to vote it down, stuff like that. Some of the stuff I was like, yeah, this is completely reasonable to do this,
So he's a really well-known political activist in Washington State. He's very active in getting initiatives signed and standing up against the government. He's not well liked within Washington politics. And there's actually...
Yeah.
I don't know if you know, but there's actually court cases on right now related to him stealing a chair.
Oh, cool.
Because they're after him for it. Because apparently he was on the phone and he was in a rolling chair at like an Office Depot or something a couple of years ago, and he rolled out and then he came back in and brought the chair back. But they're after him for stealing it.
So this is really something of like, what can we get him for type thing, as opposed to like...
To me, that's what it feels like. But, I mean, who knows? Anyway, the point being, I think that's the most stark and noticeable change. For all of Trump's presidency, the Republican Party as a whole was very reluctant to challenge Trump on anything. and just sort of sat in the background because he holds a lot of sway over a lot of very vocal voters. I don't think they represent the majority of the Republican Party. I think the Republican Party, when Trump ran, I think a lot of Republicans were in the same boat as Democrats were in this election, where they voted for Biden because it was the candidate they had, not because they like him. Yep. Most Republicans I speak to will point to things that they really like that were done well with Trump, like the economy did very well, unemployment did very well up until COVID. And those are the kind of things they'll talk about. Or, African-American unemployment's at some of its lowest levels ever. Same with Hispanic workers.
Right. And he did see gains in 2016, like those voters. Again, I mean, I think I said it in a past podcast. I don't remember which one. If you make people's lives better, that's really all that matters, and they will vote for you. And so the Hispanic people saw that. African-Americans saw that. No matter what I feel about Trump, when you do that, that's how you get votes, And I think they saw those gains. I mean, all that stuff got reported in 2016, or even 2020, that he was gaining ground with those voters, And so, yeah, I mean, I have tons of problems with Trump, but one thing I did admire, I'm like, he's just doing it. Like, you just see him give a speech, you're like, well, I guess we're doing this now. Like, I don't like the way he did it or what he said or how he went about it, but a lot of people progressives that I've listened to are like, especially now with what's happening now is like, so we're just gonna sit here. We're just gonna sit here and we're not gonna say anything. We're gonna be the totally passive aggressive spouse or partner, where all this stuff is going on and the conservatives are like, look at how loud they are and obnoxious and they're saying all that. It's like, yeah, but they're doing stuff. Like, you guys are just kind of sitting there like, oh, I don't know, we can't do anything about Build Back Better, we can't do anything about the economy, oh, what about inflation? It's like, well, then do something, you know what I mean? Like, fight, like, that's one thing I think that we're on the left is having. It's like, okay, so I've heard Biden described as a sleepy coat rack before. And I'm starting to feel it. There's a lot of sleepy coat rack energy.
I mean, Sleepy Joe's a really common refrain. I know people that refer to him as a potato. Potato Joe.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I'll say this. To bring it back to grief and everything, really go read that article. It really lays out, like, what has happened. The only thing it didn't have is, like, numbers. I know there's been at least 50 court cases that have been thrown out of court that have, like, of conservatives trying to challenge the election, and these are in front of conservative judges that Trump has appointed. Those have been thrown out. There's been audits of Arizona, I know for sure. I know there's been other states. Arizona, they found that there was more votes for Biden than there was for Trump, so Biden won Arizona even more. So read that article. It's really good. I think I'll read one more thing that I thought was kind of amazing. Let's see here. There is a great video where they do side-to-side things of before the election and after the election with different officials like Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell, how they totally turn, whatever. 727 people were arrested with and charged with crimes. More than 75 have been charged with entering a restricted area, and they have also had deadly
with a weapon.
Weapons. Yeah. And people are like, well, they weren't violent. They have a list of weapons that these people had. They had baseball bats, fire extinguishers, a wooden club, spears, crutches, a flagpole, bear spray mace, chemical irritants, stolen police shields, a hockey stick, a stun gun, and knives. And only a handful of people have been charged with carrying a gun inside. There's a famous photo of somebody jumping over one of the banisters. He had a pistol that I saw in the photo and twist ties in his hand. So he is probably being charged, if they can find out who it is, with having a gun in the, in the chambers. So, but the second article I wanted to bring out, which again, this is tying it back to grief, website I've never heard of called Roll Call. Now, I've heard of some of these things before, that there's a lot of people on the Hill that are very frustrated with this disconnect between, you people knew the big lie, you knew it was a lie, and yet you still work here. I have to work with you, and I still have to see you every day, even though when there's this disconnect.
This was an interesting behind the scenes perspective that actually really appreciated this article.
Yeah, because I think what I was hearing, you hear verbal things where somebody will give an interview, some staffer or whip or assistant will be like, "It's rough." That's really all you'll
Hmm.
hear. But this is somebody that the article was again by roll call. They're covering Congress. The quote the headline is just a quote. It says they wouldn't care if I was dead. A staffer fallout from January 6th. Denial of insurrection, always on work. Culture's on a pile of trauma, and a lot of people just talk about they are just burned out. 5 people died in the attack. I hate that they reload ads every 7 seconds on this website. That's the only thing I don't like. 5 people died in the attack, including a police officer. 2 officers died by suicide after the violence. Some officers have brain injuries, and one lost an eye. And then somebody said, when I see, and they said, quote, they took a lot of anonymous interviews because obviously people didn't talk on the record and they didn't want to be outed. They said, when I see those, quote, when I see those members in the hallway or the basement, I think to myself, they would not care if I was dead.
That's the headline.
Yeah, and then basically they said that when an alert went out on April 2nd that there was an external threat, some staffers said their heart raced. They said that the previous routine safety notifications now carry a heavier weight, particularly since the vague alert in the same used to describe the thousands of violent rioters on January 6th. So I heard another, today's alert, quote, today's alert was the same terminology on the 6th, external security threat, the staffer told CQ roll call via text. Today it was a car. On the 6th, it was an insurrectionist mob. So this isn't, I remember having fire drills and things at school, and it was like very abstract. You do this because you want people to be safe. But now that there has been an attack on the Hill, when you get an alert that there is a problem, it is no longer an abstract exercise. These people see what can happen or possibly happen when stuff like this takes place. And I think it was important to, somebody quit. They says, I don't regret going, quote, I don't regret going back to the Hill, but I don't feel like dying at work.
Yeah. And that's like I said, it's very interesting behind the scenes. As you said in the kind of beginning talking about this article, usually when you hear from staffers or whips or people working on Capitol Hill that aren't the actual elected representatives, you frequently hear oh yeah, it was really hard, or it was difficult, or we're working on fixing things after that because it was a really bad day, right? It's always very measured and subdued. So I think
right.
Hey, would you speak on a condition of anonymity really made a big difference. So it was interesting to hear how it's going. And 100%, this is very representative of kind of the lingering effects on our political system, because these aides that work for the various congressmen and senators, they do a ton of work. Like, they really do a lot of work on the back end. And, if they're quitting or they're stressed out, like, the quality of their work goes down or other people have to pick up their work. One of the things this article brings up is the kind of the culture of work hard, which by and large the United States is beginning to move away from. But on Capitol Hill, it's extremely competitive and people are very, very driven to advance in that.
They did talk about working till like 9 p.m. in that article of like, you're just on all the time. You get up now with smartphones, you're obviously connected at all times.
Yep.
So like the moment you get up, you can check an email, respond, go to work. You can come home and you can answer with a laptop. You can answer emails right away.
Exactly.
There's not like this 9 to 5, like I'm done. Plus, if you think about it, I took a step back from this article and thought, okay, no matter what I feel about people on the right or the left or how like the rant I just went on about, do something, there is staffers that are doing something. These people that are at a lower level are writing responses. They're writing press statements. They're reading these bills. They're the ones, when we make fun of politicians, like they didn't even read it. They don't even know. They don't. It's because these staffers that work for them are literally reading hundreds of pages and breaking it down. They have tons of different backgrounds, legal, psychological, whatever. They're going to college for political science. They're breaking this down going, okay, so what does this mean for us in our district? Hopefully, I'd imagine they would be. And they're the ones actually putting in the work to say, okay, I have to go to my boss who's a senator and say, these are the bullet points. And this, if you watch Fox News or CNN and they go, this is, but Bernie Sanders, whoever is working, is like, this is why they want to do this. It's because their staffer has come to them with a bullet pointed list or a breakdown to say, listen, you don't have time to read 200 pages. I broke it down into 10 bullet points, and here's the things that I pulled out that were important,
Exactly.
So if there's a mental toll on these people and they're quitting, where does that infrastructure go of people literally putting in the work to do actual lawmaking and the legislation, Like, to me, that's more troubling. They did bring up in the article that I think it was towards the end, quote, people need to get assistance, but they're too afraid of what is going to happen to them if they take a day off to figure out what is going on with their mental health, because most chiefs of staff don't actually know how to handle that. And then later they talk about there was actually a department, I'm trying to find it, but there was a department in here that said, I can't find it, but there was a department where, oh yeah, there's something called stupid ads, the OAE, which is it's the Office of Employment Assistance. I just want to read this quote. There is people on the Hill that are like a psychologist, it's a team of people to help you with issues. Quote, before I use it, I brushed it off. Oh my God, the ad loaded again. Before I use it, I brushed it off as, how could they understand my issues with my boss? Or how could they understand the challenges of Hill staff? And I was wrong in every respect. The former House aide told CQ Roll Call, quote, OAE is a dedicated team of experts specifically trained to assist Hill staff with unique challenges. And she said she praised them and said they're able to meet with you, and credited her working with the office for breaking through and making positive changes in her work and work and life outside the whatever. And so between January 6th and April 16th, the OAE had seen more than 5,400 individual interactions, including support service to individuals, follow-ups, management consultants, trainings, briefings, and group services. They said it's been very, troubling. It sounds like there might be some, I'm inferring this from reading these training briefings, consultants, there may be some therapy going on, or like some psychologist there to be like, do you just need a moment to talk, or something like that. Like, it seems like that is kind of going on, but that's more of an inferring from the article, they didn't specifically say that. But I don't know. I think that's important. And again, if these people are being stressed out more and more, what does that say for the actual system of government when, these senators and Congress people don't have a staff to go to because people are quitting,
Yeah.
To me, that is problematic.
It doesn't sound like from the article that like people are leaving in droves, but it is a stress on the system that should be something that we're aware of. And it's, like I said, it's behind the curtain, something that we normally don't get to see in public. So I really appreciated that perspective on the article. The other thing that was really nice is they did talk to people on kind of aides on both sides of the aisle that are, frustrated with their politician that they support, colleagues. Not particularly conservatives. Like, their aides are frustrated that the person that they're working for is out in public, like downplaying what happened when, they were in the office when people came in the building and were banging on the doors and were, calling for them to be hung and making lots of noise. Whether or not you believe it was a violent protest, it's still extremely terrifying, because when you're in one of those buildings, you don't really know what that crowd's going to do. And
you probably hear noise, and unless you have a window office, which I'm sure is reserved for certain members of those chambers, if you're kind of a middling person from whatever and all you hear is noise and it's behind a locked door, that's incredibly terrifying.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was very loud, right? Like, there was tons of people going through those hallways, yelling, chanting, calling out names or slogans. And, when you get a small area with a ton of people, especially a building like that that's a lot of stone, it echoes a lot and amplifies noise.
Oh, yeah, it's a good it's built for that kind of, I'm sure back in the day it was built for speeches, and, and they've just restored it and kept it, so renovated to accommodate that.
Without knowing, I 100% understand how it would very much mark these people, how they'd be dealing with symptoms of PTSD and being very apprehensive about coming into work, very apprehensive when you start hearing those office-wide alerts and pages. And again, something that we don't really talk about, we don't hear about very often. I think when I do hear anything about it, it's usually a congressman or a senator. It's usually congressman standing up about, like, I was in the building, don't downplay this, my life was at risk. And usually it's, of course, the overplayed, over dramatized political perspective about it, because they're trying to, paint the other side as this terrible villain and garner sympathy for themselves. But this is very human.
I like that these were also anonymous staffers. So no matter politically what I have a problem with people, you hang that when you hear the interview, you hang that on the person. Like, well, obviously I don't like this person, so I'm not going to listen to what they say, or I don't care about what they say.
Exactly.
But like, if it's an anonymous staffer, you're like, this could come from anywhere.
Yep.
Meaning paints a better picture. And I think there was 12 people, if I read it right, that they interviewed.
I don't remember.
Look really quick. They said how many they talked in the beginning of the article. I don't want to misquote them. They don't say an amount. They said, 13 staffers were interviewed. CQ roll call, were granted anonymity to speak. So the last article I want to bring up is probably the worst one, where, again, this is something I heard about, but I think that this is from Reuters, and they did. I just want to shout out, this was by Peter Eisler, Jason Shep, I hope I'm saying his name right, Linda So, and Sam Hart. It was published on December 30th, 2021, so right at the end of the year. It's called The Anatomy of a Death Threat. It is an amazing infographic with audio and quotes and really digestible graphs. And for an English major, that's a big deal, like me. But it really shows, and you get to hear what people were calling into these election officials. And like Avin pointed out before we went on the air, this stuff does happen in the background a lot. But I think with the election, it definitely had an uptick. And since, I haven't really asked you, when you went through this, what was your kind of takeaway when you went through this article or whatever?
So you and I talked about this briefly before today, or before this recording this morning. We talked about it. Right. And for me,
just a few minutes, yeah.
I'm not surprised by this. Like, I've seen these kinds of reports given to politicians on both sides of the aisle from people on both sides of the political spectrum before. It's really sad and really tragic. But unfortunately, I'm not really surprised by it. And, some of the commentary that you go through this with some of the racist rhetoric, although there weren't very many that were listed as being racist. Out of the total 850 that they found, there was 9 that were found to have racist content.
They
break it down.
Have a quiz on there that you can take. Yeah, they have a quiz you can take on there if you think that it's problematic or covered by free speech. So
the very interesting takeaway from me from this particular article, one, like, they did a really good job of digging in deep and actually getting the audio and transcripting the audio. I personally think they report that they found 850 specific incidents of threats or just very aggressive calls. I mean, they weren't all violent threats. It was like threats of litigation or other forms of action. There was a large amount of threats of violence. There was a large amount of
threatening people's families.
Threatening families. I think it was like 250 out of them had some level of threats of violence, which is a pretty huge amount. And the thing is I think this has been going on for years, and it's something that's always been around. And personally, I've always been like, well, why don't they go after these people, or why don't they sue these people? And this article does a really good job of why these people that made these calls and made these threats haven't been prosecuted. What was it, 12 or 13 people? I'm not finding the graph here in the article, but
it's a beautiful how it's laid out, but you got to scroll down before it reloads because there's a lot of like info and stuff on it. So
I mean, it's concerning that this is the way people feel, but I'm actually astounded that the numbers that they're reporting here are so low, because I would have imagined these numbers to be way higher given the extremely high level of emotion involved in this election, how riled up people were about the election being stolen or being fraudulent. I was shocked that the volume was so low. And now, mind you, this article's too not talking about like the Biden campaign or like even high level officials. Like it's talking about election officials and some higher level officials, but it's also talking about like the staffers that do the job that are feeling threatened because they're a staffer on an election committee.
And the worst part is, I was talking to my wife about this. These are public people mostly, except for their staff. But like, I can go on our county website and look at the auditor. I can look at the treasurer. I can look at so you can look that stuff up online, and they're just such public figures. It's not just some anonymous person you're calling up saying, I'm going to go after you. I mean, these people are public people. And so like I said to you before we started recording, like, do these people have to get security? Do they have to make sure that, are they checking on their families more?
Yep.
Because people are, to me, this is terrible. Like I told Avin, like they're doing their job, but he pointed out like this is an important job, which he's right. But like, there's this really sheds a light on, again, like the other article did, that like before, I heard this happen, but it was always like a passing, there were some death threats sent to so-and-so, but now you hear the audio and you read what they've transcribed and it's horrific, and it's one of those things where it actually makes me more angry at the conservatives who continue this big lie, because it's like, you understand that like you're not speaking in a bubble anymore. You're not just speaking to your Patreon subscribers. You're not just speaking to your people that subscribe to your podcast. People are hearing this, and this is the outcome of what they're doing. And I'm not saying that they're telling people to do that, but as we said earlier with Trump, if you say these things and kind of put your hands up and say, well, it is what it is, other people will feel emboldened to say, then this is, I'm totally fine with this. Like it's my call is justified because nobody has pushed back.
Well, I mean, like in the first article in the Washington Post, the very first quote on the article is from President Trump. The insurrection took place on November 3rd, Election Day. January 6th was the protest. And you and I have talked about this many times before. I don't go so far as to call what happened on January 6th at the Capitol an insurrection. It was a egregious violation of appropriate behavior in an election, in a democratic political system and process. It was driven by an egregious level of stirring up the base. Even when Trump didn't do it directly, a lot of his supporters and people on the outside fringes in the media and even his family definitely did a lot to foment the resentment.
I mean, that's something that's being investigated right now about who knew what in his cabinet and what they were sharing with each other. If they were meeting with protesters, there's some talk that they did meet with some of these people before. Some of those people, I don't have their names. It didn't really get into our, even though we're talking about January 6th, because I think it's still up in the air. But some of the people that were planning the protest at the Rotunda or whatever, the Capitol there, what do they call that? Wherever before they went to the Capitol proper, those people are coming forward and wanting immunity from prosecution because they, feel they were thrown under the bus. I mean, I don't want to put words in their mouth. So basically, there's more going on, and so, I mean, I would disagree with you and say it was an insurrection, but what I think is, we'll talk about later maybe with voter rights, is that I think this is kind of, it is a weird magic trick in a way where this is what is in my hand and what I'm having you look at, but with my other hand, I'm doing something else. And we'll probably talk about that more when we talk about voter rights, because I think that's a big system of like, there's something going on about these people coming into the building. They wanted Pence to overturn the election. The president even said that, there's a quote here in this first article about Pence. Oh, right here. When Trump spoke to the crowd gathering on the mall, he denounced the election results as the most brazen and outrageous election theft, quote unquote, and declared, "We will stop the steal." He asserted that Vice President Mike Pence had, quote unquote, the absolute right to reject the electoral college count and said, quote, send it back to the states to re-verify and we become president, end quote. Pence that morning had already indicated to Trump he did not agree. He complained about the explosion of bullshit and the election count prompted by the crowd to chant the phrase. He then urged the crowd to march in the Capitol. You have to show strength, and you have to show, and you have to be strong. So yeah, so I do think it was an insurrection. I think the moment he got Pence involved, to me, that signals an insurrection. Do I think the people, like, there was people in the chamber saying we need to drag these people out? I mean, there's been tons of interviews. We need to drag these people out. The guy had twist ties. What was he going to do with them? You don't go into a building with twist ties. He's not twist tying garbage cans together, or garbage bags. My thing is but it's all a legal thing.
I'm not disagreeing with that.
What I'm saying is, I think the legal scholars right now are talking about the scope of what this thing is. But I think, again, when we talk about voter rights and things, I want to bring it more into that of what is happening behind the scenes to make it easier to do publicly what they tried on January 6th, I think is, and again, it's still ongoing, but it has been a year, so we found out a lot more. So,
oh yeah, and
I mean,
the trials are still going on. They're still subpoenaing people. They're still fighting. People have been charged with contempt of Congress for not coming forward and speaking when they said they would come. And the whole thing is shameful. It is embarrassing and disappointing that any of this could happen, and that our politicians either kept silent about what was going on, or in some way supported it, even if they did it in a way that gave them plausible deniability. Like Trump, well, I never actually said that. Like, I didn't tell them to do what they did. They just did that on their own. Right. Even though you listen to it and you're like, it was inferred.
Yeah. And that's where the legal question comes down.
Yep.
Yeah, can you infer things? How does that... And also, I didn't bring it out in this thing, but many of his followers in interviews, the people going to court and said, oh yeah, he told us to... They got that from him of oh, he told us to go do that, so that's why we were there. Because he told us to stop the steal or march, so we did that. We did it,
Yep.
Which legally, I don't know how that... I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how that factors into a legal argument of well, they're saying he did, so did he? I don't know.
And again, kind of bringing it back to grief, and the articles we're specifically talking about, those actions of those people, be it a mob, be it a riot or be it an insurrection, whatever your perspective on it, marked the people that worked in the building and left a large level of grief, as we discuss in the grief of politics here. For the American people as a whole, it left a very high level of grief because, for me, it's severely disappointing to see this level of behavior in the American people. And
we always thought we were better, right? We always thought that you'd see a coup in another country or the tanks going to the Capitol, and you think, although that didn't happen here, part of it did. There was a march that they did breach the building, and we always thought, we're better than that.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're kind of I don't know, there's something there as opposed to that can never happen here.
There's a subset of the population that are willing to be involved in that type of activity, and this event, the January 6th. I'm going to call it event so that others can apply whatever label they want to apply to it. You, insurrection, me, riot. It was not a protest. And I don't care if Trump says that. It may have started that way, but it did not progress that way. The event is going to embolden the more extreme members of that kind of movement and that ideology. I do think in some regards, though, a lot of people that maybe were sucked into the energy of the moment and the emotion of the moment can now look back and recognize oh yeah, I wasn't thinking clearly. I was really wrapped up in the events.
There was people on the sidelines too. Again, it really didn't fit the purview of this, but I did see right afterwards, even people on the right, like, oh, no, 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 no.
Yeah.
You know, like, there's a way to do this. Even Glenn Beck, who I drastically disagree with, he was like, don't do this, you know?
Yeah.
And he had a reporter go in the middle of the mob. The guy didn't go in, obviously, but he was interviewing and filming people as they were going in, and he's like, it's disgraceful.
Yeah.
You know, like, and it's not
who we are. That's not how we operate. Right? I should say it's not who we want to be. And I would say the people involved in the actual like entry to the building and attacking police officers and damaging the building, stealing property from the building, that were in there with intent to attack Congress and prevent the certification of the election, is a very small number of people when you look at the grand scheme of voters in the United States. But it's still incredibly disgraceful. And again, I think that level of kind of waking up took the people that were sort of on the fringe to look at it and be like, oh, wait, no, this was really bad. And so it did, I think, help pull some people back off the fence. But the people on the other side of the fence are that much more strongly there.
Yeah, I mean, speaking to grief, too, I mean, you probably could speak a little bit more to this than I can because I'm not conservative, but I really think it would take people that are on the edge, which it's happening a little bit now. Just as an aside, I saw like an interview with Dan Crenshaw where he's like, these aren't our people. You know, these people are grifters. Like these people that have, it will take more people like Dan Crenshaw, which I can't believe I'm saying this. I don't really agree with Dan Crenshaw. It'll take more people like him to say, no, this isn't our party. This isn't who we are. You know, I've even seen people on the Blaze, Glenn Beck's network, saying, no matter what I think about Democrats, even if I disagree with them, they do try to talk about issues. If I disagree with them on climate change or the economy or whatever, that's what they're pushing. But what are we doing? It was right after January 6th. They were like, what are we doing? We're just mad and we're not focusing on, and I think it would take more people like Dan Crenshaw in the party to say, listen, we really need to focus on, you know, education or what issues really, you know, and, you know, stuff like that.
And from a conservative perspective, you know, I think Dan Crenshaw is correct in that. Like, we really need to come back to that. You know, I read an article recently, not related to this particular discussion, but tangential to what we just said, that made the same argument about the Democratic Party right now. Is Democrats aren't getting anything done because right now they've become the party of anti-Trump. Well, the article basically, it was written from a pro-Democrat writer, basically was like, hey, as the Democratic Party, as the liberal members of our country, like, we need to move past this. Like, Trump's out of office now. We need to start actually doing stuff. And I don't agree with things like they're trying to get rid of the filibuster right now, which, like, the things that, anyway, a large part of that emotion and what's going on and trying to get things pushed through is also related to, it's emboldened politicians to, well, we don't want another January 6th. And so it's created that other wave, an effect within our political system as well.
Yeah.
If the Republicans are going to do these kind of extreme things and try to change rules and laws so that they can, as you said before, work on the back end to do what they were doing publicly before, the Democrats are also going to try to do that at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, and it's all, I think, emboldened by kind of what happened on January 6th. It was such a high level of emotion and very little level of rationality, right? Like, what makes this group of people think that for any reason that their actions are actually going to prevent the certification of the election? Because they were told it would, but there was no digging into the rules or the laws. There was zero research. Like, they just blindly trusted the people that told them that without recognizing, like, you can't stop this.
Well, not only that, but like a lot of people on the right pointed out, okay, so we get our way, right? And for whatever reason, Trump is certified as the president. Now that we've set these machinations in motion, couldn't the Democrats just do that next time?
Yep.
Like, if a Republican comes, they'd be like, well, you guys did it. Like, we know now how to do this, you know? That's why I think there's so many guardrails right now with state auditors and, elected officials, and they have a staff, the auditing that takes place. Like, I was actually excited when the votes got recounted, when there was an audit of the votes, because then it's like, okay, that, what was it, like Cyber Ninja, whatever that company was called that did Arizona. It's like, okay, so now definitively we can say, hey, we counted them again. Arizona is done. But you still see people on the right going, but what about this? Or what about that? And you're like, this is never going to end.
And I think the most significant amount of noteworthy things found in any of the audits that were done, and there were only a few of them, were like in Wisconsin, and it was like 108 questionable ballots. They weren't even like, this is definitely fraud or this was done incorrectly.
It was like somebody filling something out incorrectly.
And there were, mind you, some incidents of fraud found, but they were inconsequential, like in the tens or less nationwide.
Yeah, like I think
it's man, maybe it was more than that. Maybe I'm exaggerating on the downside, but for the most part, the distrust that this generated in the election process is going to stick with us for a very long time, and that bums me out, to not put it in a very technical phrase, because I think we have a pretty stinking reliable election system, and it's really
I don't know, Avin.
hard.
I go to therapy. Being bummed out is a technical thing.
Oh, all right. Well.
I could go to my therapist and go, I'm bummed out, and he could be like, okay, let's talk about it.
I mean, I'm not going to lie. I also go to therapy, and my therapist before has been like, that sucks. And it's okay.
Real technical terms.
Right.
This sucks. Real big brain stuff.
But, like, for the most part, we have a pretty stinking good election system in the United States, and we really do, like, politicians on both sides of the aisle really do want to respect the institution, because they don't want to undermine the Constitution. You end up with this kind of chaos.
It's happening. Yeah.
So, anyway.
So yeah, what did you want to say? So you made fun of my thesis. What would you say? You said you only rolled your eyes at the first part, that the threat of democracy is going to, like, we're not under threat. I would argue that although that was a bold statement, I still think because of the things that are happening behind the scenes, and now that we know, there's an old phrase of like sunlight is the best disinfectant. Mm-hmm. Now there is a percentage of the party that is willing to do what they did on January 6th. So something's happening, and you at least need to keep your eye on it, is all I'm saying. It's a bold statement, yeah.
I would say that there is no more threat to American democracy than there ever has been. It's just out in public, and people are way more bold about what they're doing about it. The system worked. The process worked. The checks and balances in the United States of America, through the judicial system, through the legislative system, did exactly what they were supposed to do, and they did their job. Even the vice president was like, no, I'm not going to do that. You're stupid.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this much: the judicial system was like working a lot of OT on this, especially even the Supreme Court. It's like, no. I'll just say this: like, it's something now that I am thinking about more, like I said earlier, than I was before January 6th of last year. You'd always hear anecdotally, oh, you voted that way, that's weird, or like, I don't agree with this, or I like Trump, I don't like Trump, and it was all kind of in the background. But seeing that happen, you're like, oh, like, there's something here, that now needs to be watched, I think, a little bit more. And
I don't necessarily disagree. Like, it brings light to what had been in the shadow before. And yes, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I definitely do think that it brings forward things that we need to pay attention to, because before we weren't. People making these sorts of movements, trying to set up systems to advance their own political gains, regardless of the benefit to the country. But I also think that on the other end of the aisle, the Democratic Party and the more liberal representatives in our country and media are not wasting the crisis and are building up a higher
Oh yeah.
level of emotion than is necessary. There's no,
Well, I mean,
there was no threat to our democracy in January 6th. The percentage of likelihood that they would have changed anything is no different than any other election. It's just,
right.
it was public and it was shameful.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
I'm not, yeah, no. I would agree with that. I would just say now it makes me more mindful of that than before. I was like, oh, it's a couple people that are upset.
Yep.
Now you're like, oh, it's really, like it's.
If a couple people here and there all get together, it can be a very significant number of people.
So, so I guess that's really your final thing. Yeah, I mean, we kind of just said our final thing. So, Avin, that's how we feel about January 6th, I guess, for now. We may have to do this in another year, be like, it's been another year.
There's going to be more information that comes out.
Yeah. So what, you said now what you're going to talk about. What are you going to talk about next month when you do this podcast?
So I want to go over kind of the difference of opinions on legalization of marijuana and other drugs in the United States, or regulation. Kind of the
it's
difference.
Changed a lot.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely had a large shift in the United States in our lifetime. I mean, even over the last 10 years, there's been a big change in opinion publicly. But I'd really like to talk about kind of the viewpoint, conservative versus liberal, on the idea of legalizing versus not legalizing. I will disclaim, I want to talk about it, but as a conservative, I am libertarian, and so I am pro legalization of.
I mean, I mean, to totally disclose too, like, I'm liberal. I have never smoked weed, but I think if you do that, and weed isn't an expensive, it isn't an expensive drug. And most people, I've never heard of a weed-induced crime unless it was laced with something that, like PCP or whatever. My thing is, like, I'm still dismayed that people smoke it. I think just like cigarettes, it's harmful that way. But, like, if you want to go home and smoke a joint and watch a movie, or hang out with friends at a party and smoke a joint when everybody's just hanging out, I mean, to me, that's no different than having a beer at a party or whatever. And, don't drive home. Don't, get a DD like you normally would. And we could talk about that next month.
Yep. But, and so I still don't remember what my idea was last month that I was super excited about, that I think would have been way more.
You're going to shoot up in bed at like 2 a.m. and be like, oh my gosh, I figured it out. Like,
right.
That's usually what happens to me.
But,
I
do think that's a good debate.
Send it to me in a text so I could, yeah. No, I would like to talk about it too, because again, I don't smoke weed, but when people are like, hey, I'm going to smoke or whatever, I'm like, I don't care. Like, it's legal. Like, go buy some. I don't care at all. Yeah. But before we go, I want to, again, thank everybody for listening. If you like the show, please share it with your friends and everything. We're on Apple iTunes. Mm-hmm. Give us the stars and the reviews. We have one review from my therapist, person on there that said, basically, I like the podcast, but you need to talk more about grief. Av and I have talked about that, and we're trying to address that more like more in the podcast. So yeah, we are trying to address that, and then
completely agree.
Yeah, and then if you guys want to write to us again, this podcast, The Grief of Politics, comes out once a month, and where we talk about topics that interest us. You can write to us at gwgpodfellows@gmail.com. So go there, and write us an email. Let us know what you think of the show, or if you have a topic or something you want us to talk about, or what you thought of an episode. And then again, please share it with your friends. I don't know if Avin has a Twitter handle, but I am at JustLittleJoe on Twitter. So if you listen to the episode and like it there, again, I will try to get better at promoting the episode. I'm terrible at promoting my own podcast. But is there anything else you want to promote, Avin, before we leave?
As we've discussed on pretty much every episode, I am also a licensed real estate agent focusing on helping people find good qualified real estate agents. If you want more info on that, feel free to reach me at avin@youragentguide, all one word.com, or on my website, youragentguide.com. And we can discuss that. Got a little intro video there, some information. Also,
if you're in the Washington area.
I can help people find real estate agents and give advice, tips, answer questions anywhere in the country.
Oh,
in the
cool.
United States.
I didn't know
I'm
if it
not
was
going
a
to speak
license. I
about
didn't know if it was a...
foreign real estate rules and laws, but I can definitely speak about the United States. It is part of the licensing process is American real estate law as a whole, although I may not know, specific states' rules and laws.
Yeah.
But also, I would just like to reaffirm, we'd love to hear from you. GWG at GWG Podfellows.
GWG Podfellows.
We'd love to hear from
At
you, your
gmail.com.
feedback, your input, any ideas on future episodes. We'd love to have that, as well as I'd really like to shout out another podcast
would be nice.
that Joe does, Gaming with Grief.
Yeah, there's a lot of grief. Gaming with grief. Yeah.
Which, if you're into video games at all, and you've experienced any pain or grief in your life, so basically everybody.
Right, yeah. Everybody that's breathing right now.
So basically everybody that plays video games could find some kind of connection in it. Joe worked really hard on it. It's a really good excuse for him to play more video games. So
it is. Well, I mean, let's be honest. We all buy things in our life that we don't look at again or complete or finish, whether it be a book, a movie, or whatever. So this is just a way for me to really look at the lens of grief through gaming and actually complete what I purchase. So I can justify, paying money for games and stuff like that. So,
yep.
I mean, that's a knock-on effect. I did actually submit, to put it out there, I submitted to Kind of Funny. They're like a YouTube, internet, Patreon channel. I like the host on there and everything. One of their main hosts is pretty big, Greg Miller. He actually put a survey out there. He wants to be on other people's podcasts. So you can fill out a form of submit. I did that. I have not received anything back. But I think there's 2 days at the end of the month, I think, or middle of the month. End of the month in January, middle of the month in February, I might get on. He might be on my podcast. I do not know. So, but I at least went through the process of submitting. So we'll see.
Cool.
Because they have thousands of people listening to them. So obviously, if you get, him with a bullhorn talking about your channel, it's good. So
yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. So I guess with that, next month we'll talk about weed. Is there anything else, Adam, before we say goodbye?
Nope. I think we've covered pretty much everything. Thanks everybody for listening. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Have a good month, and we will talk to you guys next month.